So this episode is about music, which I guess we've touched on this a little bit, but this is our first foray into a single topic, and it's the Beatles.
It's your favorite topic.
One of my favorites.
Well,
yeah.
your favorite band.
Yeah, it's my favorite band. I have a few others I love too, but yeah, there's no getting around it. I sort of admire the Beatles.
We've talked about this before.
Right.
Beatles or Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And you're a Beatles guy.
I'm a Beatles guy.
And I love the Beatles.
Right.
I'm a Rolling Stones guy.
Right.
Not because of their longevity, just
No, that's fair.
different types of music.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think I'd still like to ask you, you've made it clear now you like the Rolling Stones, maybe better, but you're a little bit older than me, as we've discussed on here before. So I'd like to just...
I need my ibuprofen.
Yes, I'd just like to touch on your recollections, though, of when the Beatles first arrived in America, because you were a teenager when that happened.
Well, not really.
No?
No, in 1964.
Four, yeah.
I would have been 11 years old.
Okay, so not quite a teen.
Not
All right.
quite a teenager.
Sorry about that.
I think at that point, I started getting interested in music, and my interest manifested itself in the early evening hours or late afternoon hours in the middle of winter,
Okay.
when I could tune in a station, when I lived in Virginia, tune in a station from Chicago.
Okay.
And they'd play the top 10 or the top 20
Right.
every day.
Right.
And the Beatles dominated the charts.
Sure,
They dominated the charts, or
Yeah.
they were beginning to dominate the charts.
Right.
And what was Sullivan? The Sullivan appearance was it February?
January or February.
February?
Yeah, it was early in the year, though, yeah, for sure.
And I remember the hype surrounding that. I wasn't necessarily a big Beatles fan, not necessarily a big fan of any one particular group, but
Right.
I recall that.
Yeah.
And I recall watching.
Yeah.
And if you look at all of the, some of the replays of their appearance on Ed Sullivan, you can't hear a lot of it because the girls were screaming.
Screaming, I know. The very first concert the Beatles did, many of us might assume it would be in Miami or New York or whatever, based on the pictures we see from that time period, but it was not, right? Where was it?
It was at the old Uline Arena, the Washington Coliseum, 3rd and M Street, Northeast in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
It was a beaten up, battered old auditorium where I was familiar with it because there was an amateur hockey team that played there.
Right.
And my dad would take us to hockey games occasionally when I became interested in hockey. That's where they made their first appearance.
Yeah.
And I believe the building still stands. I'm
Right.
not sure what they use it for.
See, that's an amazing little anecdote to me that
They didn't play the Garden.
right.
They didn't play a huge venue.
No,
They just were at
played this
the
dumpy
Washington
little arena
Coliseum.
in Washington, D.C. Yeah. How far from your house was that?
Maybe, D.C. was, 10 miles?
Yeah. So
then-
not far away.
No, not
Yeah.
far away.
Well, my experience is I was younger than you. I was only, just a few years old when they made that appearance on the Sullivan Show, 5 or 6 or whatever. It's interesting, though, because for the most part, my life has been in the United States, but we had this period, I've mentioned it before on other shows, of our family living in England. So we were in England from early 1964 to early 1968. So our impression of the Beatles was really English-centric, which is cool, but, different than what most of our audience went through. So what I remember about the Beatles in the 1960s, living in England, was some of the appearances they made on TV over there. There's a couple that come to mind. One was this appearance where they sang Hey Jude on the David Frost Show. I always thought that was pretty
David
cool.
Frost Show.
Yeah, and they had a live audience. They had all these people. I don't know how you got into that thing, but in the pictures you can see all these people crowded around, all 4 of them. It's amazing, and it was an amazing moment, too. They sang Hey Jude, and that's the first time we'd ever heard that song, and yet it became a sing-along even in that TV
Right.
appearance because there was people around them.
Yeah.
So I always remembered that, and then the other real television memory I have was in, I think it was December of 1967, because it wasn't very long before we moved, and it was on Boxing Day, which is December 26th, the day after Christmas, which they call Boxing Day over there, and that's the night the BBC aired Magical Mystery Tour, which is a crazy movie filled with all kinds of wild colors. But what really made it funny, though, was the BBC at the time only broadcast in black and white. So that movie made no sense in many ways, the psychedelic aspect of it. And I'm telling you, the morning after, I do have vivid memories of adults, wondering what they just saw. Yeah. So anyway, those are some television memories for me. Also, one more thing I'd like to just throw at our audience. My brother, who's 12 years older than me, So he has really distinct memories from that period, living in England as well, though. So let's just hear from Bob. He talked a little bit once about the Beatles and what he was observing during that time in England in the 1960s.
This is a great perspective.
Yeah.
For the first 2 years, the Beatles could do no wrong. Everything they did, people loved them for it. And they were clearly, 2 years into our stay in England, they were still at the top. And that's when I started to notice that probably they were going to last a long time because they kept changing so much. They bring in some style like the "She Loves You," yeah stuff, and then other bands would copy them. And by the time the other groups got the hang of that, the Beatles would move on to something else. They'd bring out the Rubber Soul album, for example, and so that led to another wave of trends. And then the other rivals were doing that, and suddenly they're into psychedelic stuff. And then just barely do the other groups get into that, and then they do the White Album. I mean, what was that about? But they were just so ahead of the curve all the time.
All right, well, there's my brother, Bob Blakey, who lives up in Calgary. And I interviewed him on many subjects when he was down here last year. And there you heard just a few words about the Beatles. I'd like to pull out a prop now. Of course, this is Abbey Road, the last album the Beatles recorded. And I guess I'm holding it for a lot of reasons.
You're not going to get rid of it.
I'm not going to get rid of it. The main reason being this is the very first album I ever purchased with my own money. So why don't we find out what your first album was that you bought?
It's a qualified. It's actually two answers.
Okay.
The first album I ever got was the Smothers Brothers live at the Onion.
Oh my gosh.
I believe it was at the Onion, the San Francisco venue.
Yeah.
Because I was into the Smothers Brothers, but that really wasn't all music. It was comedy. The first musical album I really bought was Santana Abraxas.
Wow, that's a great one.
I was a freshman in college, and I was in the library. I discovered they had albums there, and they had headphones. And going, I'm going to try this. And I picked up Santana's album, and I put on the headphones, and I just went, this is just too cool.
Yeah.
The way the Beatles evolved. And how long were they together?
They were together about 8 years as far as recording on a major label, right? Only 8 years. Though.
But they evolved during all those years.
Right. That's, I think, the most impressive part as a band was just how much they grew and changed and wanted to produce something new every time out. So that's probably one of the reasons I've stuck with them. And then now moving on, they broke up, as we know, in 1970, I guess it was. And Paul McCartney, he's probably been the most prolific solo artist of the four, but, George Harrison had a nice period there, and John Lennon did a few things on his own that are certainly memorable. Imagine comes to mind, of course.
Right.
But, McCartney, I've managed to see him a few times live because I never saw the Beatles. So I guess I wanted to have some sort of link to them all, so I've gone and seen Paul a few times and been very impressed. So many of the shows have been really, really good. And so maybe for just a minute, why don't we run through just a few highlights of shows I went to, in the last 12 or 13 years. right, well, there's a few home movies from some of the McCartney concerts. As an adult, is there any band that you've, I don't know, just feel a strong connection to?
As an adult, I greatly admire Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
Right.
They gained notoriety, was it 1975 with Born to Run?
Right.
That's when Bruce became big, although he did a couple of albums before. But he has evolved. He's an old man now.
Right.
I think he's 75 years old.
Yeah.
And his music reflects his age, which I greatly appreciate.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up. There's a bit of nostalgia for you. Some of our favorite bands, of course, a lot of time spent on the Beatles, but also we've touched on a few other bands as well, right?
Yeah. Let's get out the turntable.
Yes.
Put on some vinyl.
All right, we'll go play a record.
The old days. Oh.
No CDs even. We'll play records.